A year ago I was pretty much finishing up my first playthrough of Bloodborne. If you'd have asked me then whether I wanted more of the Soulsborne experience, I'd have flat out told you no. I still believe that 3 games over a 3-year period is way too much. But admittedly, it's hard for me to come to terms with the fact that we may not get one of these damnable things again, or indeed, at least for a while. So, basically, if you've seen any reviews for this game so far, what I'm about to say will seem far too familiar. Dark Souls 3 is a greatest hits package, in as much as that it's taken the most favourable elements from every game in the series and applied them here. For instance, you've got things like the gem modification from Demon Souls, allowing you to alter a weapon's properties to adapt them to an entirely different character build altogether, and then you've got Bloodborne's faster combat pace, which gives credence to some of the heavier dex builds in the game. It all comes together really well. From Software has improved the combat mechanics in every successive release, and they've not bucked that trend here at all. Regardless of your character build preferences, it's all buttery smooth and gels together to make the totally enthralling experience the fans have come to love and expect from the series so far. This is still, for my money at least, the greatest series of RPGs we've ever had combat-wise. So let's start with PvP, shall we? It's really back in a massive way. What seemed like a cursory attempt at multiplayer in the first 2 entries was fleshed out considerably in Dark Souls 2, and here it feels like a standalone experience. Invading the world of another player has never taken me more than 2 minutes, and the aptly named fight clubs have never been more enjoyable, with the addition of new types of phantoms whose allegiance is always questionable at best. Although the lag is sometimes a little frustrating to have to deal with, and my foes are often still static character models simply drifting across the arena to land hits on me I'd never seen coming, I'll just put this down to something that will hopefully be patched out at a later stage. On to the meat of the review. So what really makes a Souls game so special, however, is, of course, the world building. This is where Dark Souls 3 really shows its roots as a game. Whilst it's not entirely the glorious labyrinthine mess of the original Dark Souls, it's not as linear as the second instalment, and takes more inspiration from Bloodborne and Demon Souls than anything else. Being lost in any other game is often the start of a frustrating hour, which will inevitably end in a trip to GameFAQs. But in Souls, being lost is half the point. A fork in the road, no wait, 2! But it's been half an hour since the last bonfire, and you're carrying almost 3 levels worth of souls. Dare you go on, praying that a bonfire will present itself soon? Or will you go back, sacrificing the valuable progress you've made in order to grab a few extra levels? Even as a Souls veteran, that choice never stopped irking me throughout my entire playthrough of the game. My longing for discovery battling with my judiciousness. Even up to my 45th hour of playtime, this internal struggle persisted non-stop. Proof positive to me personally that the environment design is as good as it's ever been. Of course, multiple paths are worthless if they're not worth treading, and this leads me to my favourite aspect of this game in particular, its art direction. Never in any game ever has there been a general aesthetic so arse-clenchingly, ball-wrenchingly fantastic. Even within the Soulsborne series itself, you'd be hard-pushed to find vistas as beautiful and fascinating to behold as the ones here. The sheer level of detail is astounding. More than once I opened a set of double doors and audibly gasped at what was laid out before me. From the wide-open skyboxes to castles pulled straight from the pages of the best dark fantasy, there's something for everyone to love in its design. Perhaps even more intrinsically important to the oh-so-special Souls aesthetic is the enemy design. And by Christ did they pull out all the stops here. Elements of the Lovecraftian-inspired design from Bloodborne can be seen all over Lothric. These enemies' gothic overtones dripping with brown sludge and blood, instantly inducing fear in me. The viciously detailed insectoid creatures that make the skin crawl. The gloriously fashioned knights whose armour sets you'll be pining for hours. One enemy in particular, a pale white walking dog corpse thing that occasionally sprouts a horrific maggot-infested dog-like creature from its midriff, actually invaded my dreams one evening and turned them into nightmares. Almost everything here is designed to, for lack of any better expression, shit you right the fuck up. Some first encounters are so overshadowed by the awe and disgust at what you're looking at that you'll barely make it out alive. More often than not, you just won't. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about the difficulty in this game. Don't worry, I'm not going to go all wanky on you, but it's a very important aspect of the Souls series, and how it's presented can often be the difference between a generally frustrating experience and an endearingly great one. I've often argued that there isn't so much a difficulty curve in a Souls game as there is a difficulty wall. Once you break through that first barrier to entry, you're pretty much the same as the rest of us. But that's not entirely true. In the first game specifically, the spikes in difficulty cause most first-time players, including myself, to put down the game for extremely long stretches of time, almost 6 months in my case. But in this game, the curve is a lot more accommodating to new players. Now, please don't get it into your heads that this game is by any means easier than the other entries in the series, although I happen to think that it is, but in the game's defence, I've played through 5 of the bastards now. It makes sense that I'd find this to be the easiest, but there are moments when the difficulty really ramps up, and we'll get onto that at a later stage. Just to address something, a lot of Souls veterans have complained about bonfire placement in this game, that there are apparently just flat out too many, and that From is just catering to the newbies. I could not disagree more. Some of the most unpleasant and unsatisfying moments I've had in Souls games have come from a lack of bonfires. You can call me a filthy casual all you like, but Souls games are intrinsically difficult. Specifically in Dark Souls 1, the time between bonfires was so inconsistent, and I still believe this to be the cheapest aspect of the series' difficulty overall. Here, they're regular enough to ensure that players feel they're always free to investigate every nook and cranny without fear of losing an hour's worth of progress. So, is it a perfect game? No. Most RPGs with some semblance of an open world aren't, and Dark Souls 3 is absolutely no exception. I've left out bosses up until this point because for me, it's one of the few areas the game falls short of the mark. Oh, by no means are they bad, 80% of them are of the high standard we've come to expect from the series. In fact, Dancer of the Boreal Valley and the Abyss Watchers are now amongst my favourite in the series. But even they can't shake off the dead weight of some of the game's more unoriginal and just flat out tropey boss fights. One boss in particular requires you to obtain a specific weapon to kill it. This sounds fascinating in theory and opens up some really interesting possibilities, but in reality, From's often overly cryptic attitude towards design almost guarantees that players will be glancing at the wiki to find out exactly how said weapon should be utilised correctly. In the end, it turns into one of the most uninteresting and frankly easy boss fights in the whole game, made all the more hard to swallow by the fact that the boss in question plays a significant role in the game's story. As I've mentioned previously, towards the end of the game, the difficulty does take an unnaturally large jump, and it just feels completely out of place. Where the Dancer feels like a relatively late game skill check that challenges the player's ability to observe and memorise attack patterns, the areas following it feel incredibly cheap and, dare I say, a little bit rushed. It was around this time that the game ceased to be quite so compelling for me and became more irritating than challenging as a whole. Despite these flaws, however, and believe me, I do not say this next bit lightly, Dark Souls 3 might be the best thing From Software has ever done. You could argue all you like that it doesn't bring that same sense of originality to the genre that Demons or Dark Souls did, or that it's not as innovative in its own skin as Bloodborne, but it's the amalgamation of the series, the apex of it all. Over the course of these 5 incredible games, From Software has created a dynasty of absolute classics. RPGs that weren't only challenging for the sake of being challenging, but so engagingly endearing that we didn't mind failing, for it only meant we weren't trying hard enough. In essence, this is a greatest hits package, but what a fucking package. One that has secured Dark Souls 3's and its fellows amongst my favourite games of all time. Not bad From, not fucking bad at all.